What role would energy play if a third world war broke out? From Japan's oil shocks in the 1970s to Europe's current gas dependence, energy has always defined power, resilience, and vulnerability. If a global conflict were to erupt again, the battlefield would extend beyond armies and weapons to energy networks, markets, and technology. Let's explore how energy security, interdependence, and the renewable transition could shape such a war. Welcome back to Energy Atlas, the show where we explore how energy shapes the world. I am your host, Rasul. Today we will dive into difficult but important questions. History gives us lessons. Japan's post-war recovery showed how dependence creates fragility. After 1945, imported fuels made up nearly 9% of GDP. The oil shocks of the 1970s forced Japan to diversify, invest in efficiency, and grow with lower carbon intensity. The lesson is clear. Dependence increases exposure, while innovation builds resilience. In a future conflict, the same logic would apply. The United States, with domestic oil and gas, would stand more insulated. Europe and India, by contrast, would remain exposed through heavy import reliance. Exporters like Russia or the Middle East could lose influence if their markets were blocked. Energy today moves through deeply interconnected trade. Chen and Wu estimate that 1/3 of global primary energy is embodied in traded goods. The European Union illustrates both reliance and fragility. It cut pipeline gas imports from Russia from 137 billion cubic meters in 2021 to just 32 in 2024, replacing them with liquefied natural gas from the United States. China imported more than 11 million barrels of crude oil per day in 2023 and 24. India relied on imports for nearly 90% of its oil. The Middle East kept global energy flowing, supplying 1/5 of all oil and 1/4 of LNG through the Strait of Hormuz. In a global war, such flows would be the first target. Choke points, embargoes, or cyber attacks could ripple across entire economies. Control of energy has long been a weapon of power. Peters show how Western states used resource-driven strategies that often escalated conflict. In a third world war, such coercion would intensify. The United States could weaponize LNG export. Russia could cut hydrocarbons to its rivals. China and India would fight for oil and critical minerals. The Middle East would rely on choke points to pressure adversaries. And beyond fossil fuels, competition would spread to lithium, cobalt, and rare earth minerals, essential for advanced military technology. In war, energy supply and energy denial would both become strategic weapons. Some argue that renewables could ease this risk, but while renewables reduce reliance on fossil exporters, they do not erase vulnerability. They create new dependencies on minerals, on transmission grids, and on cybersecurity. Vakulchuk et al. Warned that fossil exporters may resist, while renewable leaders could gain leverage. Paltsev notes that renewable geopolitics depends less on territory and more on patents, supply chains, and technology. Capacity remains uneven. The United States leads in wind, solar, and LNG. Europe mixes nuclear and renewables but stays dependent on import. China dominates solar and batteries but still relies on oil import. India is scaling renewables yet locked into coal and oil. Russia and the Middle East remain tied to hydrocarbon. In wartime, technology would matter more than territory, and the balance of power would hinge on who adapts fastest. The United States would command the broadest energy base in a future war. Record oil production, global LNG leadership, nuclear strength, and renewable expansion would give it unmatched resilience. Europe will enter war having shifted from Russian gas to imported LNG. Yet this change would only swap one dependency for another, leaving Europe vulnerable to shipping or market disruptions. Russia would rely on hydrocarbons. This could provide leverage but also weakness, as refinery strikes in 2025 already revealed. China will dominate solar and battery production, but coal will still power most of its electricity, and imported oil would remain a liability at sea. India would face even harsher reality. Coal would generate most of its electricity, and oil imports would cover nearly 90% of demand. Such dependence would leave its economy exposed to shocks. The Middle East would continue to wield power through oil and gas, but geography would be its main weapon. By controlling the Strait of Hormuz, the region could hold global trade hostage. So, what does all this mean? Energy would remain the foundation of economic and military power in a future world war. Secure nations would endure. Dependent nations would suffer. Renewables would reshape the map of influence, but also create new risks. The lesson is clear. The energy transition is not just about the climate, it's about survival. In both war and peace, the nations that adapt their energy systems fastest will define the future of power. Thanks for listening to Energy Atlas. I'm your host, Rasul. Until next time, remember, energy security is not only about what we consume, but about how we prepare for the conflicts of tomorrow.